I want to welcome you here. And can you introduce yourself and explain a little bit about what your role is as a costumer?
Yeah, hi, I'm Beryl Brachman. I am currently working as the background costumer, or one of the background costumers on Star Trek Picard. Yeah, I've been on Picard for the last 2 seasons, and it's been a really exciting job. I was a fan of Star Trek before I got on this show, so it's been a really fun experience.
It's good stuff. And I mean, the background characters in Star Trek Picard are nothing to sniff at. That is a lot of work.
Yeah. I when I tell people about what I do for the show, especially people who are not necessarily familiar with what background costuming is, I tell them that I sort of like help design and facilitate basically all the non-speaking humans and aliens.
Do you want to describe a little bit about what a typical day of yours would look like?
Yeah, so basically, especially on this job in particular, I kind of have 2 different types of days. I have non-set days and then I have set days. So on a non-set day, we're typically doing either fittings or prepping for fittings. So if we're prepping for fittings, I will be looking at the image research that comes down from the designer or the assistant designers, and then having a conversation with our key costumers about what we think this is, where we think we can get it. And then I will go to the costume rental houses and try to pull stuff that we think kind of matches what it is that the research is that we've gotten from the designer. Or we will talk to the shoppers about like, hey, what do you think about this? Have you gotten anything recently that you feel like it's kind of in that vibe? But especially for background, we do a lot of pulling and not a lot of shopping. And then, I'll go to the costume houses, do a lot of pulls. The costumes will come in from the costume rental houses. And then ideally, but not always, we have the sizes of the background actors that we're going to be fitting. And frequently they're broken into categories of like person in place or person with job or alien in place or alien with job. And so we then put together racks of clothing based on what we think like alien in place would wear or person with job would wear. And then if we have sizes, we'll pull things together that we think could fit that person. And then either on the same day or a follow-up day, the actor will come in. We will try a variety of options on them, typically like 3 to 5 different options for every single look. And then we'll photograph those options, upload them to a Dropbox, and then the photographs are printed and then displayed for the costume designer and the assistant designers. The costume designer will then pick their favorite options for that person. And then either it'll just go and that'll be what they wear, or we'll get notes from the designer about what they want to tweak. Sometimes we have things that we tried on a fitting and they didn't quite fit. So they have to go and to alterations, which are either done in-house, right? Or we send them out to be adjusted and then they come back to us. And then from there, we get all these racks of clothing together and they get put on our truck and either taken to location or taken up to one of our sound stages. And that moves into my second type of day, which is a set day. So on a set day, normally it starts really early in the morning because we typically have people coming in for sometimes hours and hours of makeup. So a set call day with aliens typically means that I'm there, or one of the other backroom costumers is there at 4:30 in the morning, 4:15 in the morning, because we have to get people dressed before they go into hair and makeup. So we'll be there for like 30 minutes before any of the actors get in. We'll make sure everything's set up. We have all their costumes. They'll come in, we'll give them the costumes. Then they go to hair and makeup. This whole process takes like, 4 hours of getting people ready before they even head to set. And then once they're on set, we're on set with them to make sure that their shirt doesn't fly off or something doesn't break or their shoe doesn't lose a heel or just anything, basically. And then at the end of the shooting day, we do everything in reverse. So we all go back They get changed. They bring us their costumes. We send the costumes out to be cleaned. And then on a follow-up day, the costumes will go back down to the costume department, get broken apart. Everything that didn't get cleaned the first day gets cleaned. And then we return everything to the costume houses. So basically, that's the process.
Do you want to give some advice about some fitting room advice?
I feel like my fitting room advice, it kind of depends on the situation, whether you're doing the fitting by yourself or you are doing the fitting with a designer or an assistant designer. And I feel like when I'm fitting by myself, I try to give as much heads up about what the actor is going into as possible. Because the last thing you want is to go through the process of fitting and then they didn't know it was a night shoot, or they didn't realize it was going to be really cold, and then they just don't show up. And then all the work you've done is for naught. Because that's unlike when you work with principals, there's a big likelihood of somebody just not showing up when it's background because they can just choose not to come. So I typically like to, before I start, just like give as much information as possible because we want people who are going to be there. And then I try to check in during the fitting just to be like, hey, how does this fit? Do we need to make any adjustments? Do you feel like if it's okay now, do you feel like it could be okay for 12 hours? Like that sort of thing. And then I think the number one piece of advice that I would give in any context for fittings is I like to always give people a heads up before I touch them. So I'll say things like, hey, your collar's a little twisted. I'm going to touch your collar. Or like, hey, there's something on the seat of your pants. Is it okay if I touch you there? Or like, just give as many heads up about like, hey, this is what, so instead of just like going at somebody with your hands, just like give them a heads up, even if it's really fast, like, hey, can I touch you? And then they're like, okay, yeah. And then you can just do whatever it is you need to do. I just think it's like a courtesy issue and you don't know like what people's comfort levels are. A lot of people are first time actors, or they're just not super comfortable with touch, or they're super comfortable with touch and they're like, do whatever, I don't care. So I feel like that's regardless. And then when I'm fitting with a costume designer or an assistant costume designer, I try to be as silent as possible and not editorialize at all. And because you don't want to affect the actors' feelings about the costume, because maybe the costume designer has been working really hard to try and convince this actor to wear something, and you don't want to go in and editorialize and say something like, well, it doesn't really work or whatever. So no editorialization at all. And then you can always debrief about the costume with the designer or assistant designer once the person you're fitting has left.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about your career arc. So what got you into costumes in the first place?
I'd say like way back, my mother sews and used to sew costumes for me as a kid. And she taught me how to sew. And then I just kind of like took it and ran. And I went to a performing arts high school and did costumes with them. And luckily it was a school where a lot of the educators were part-time educators and part-time artists. So they would be like actors in the community, or they would be like big band leaders because we also had a music program. So they would teach during their day and then they would be working actors or working musicians in their evenings. So we had a relationship with a professional theater I'm from Phoenix, Arizona originally. So we had a relationship with a professional theater, and I was able to sort of finagle my way in as sort of a costume shop assistant / intern at this professional theater in high school. And then I went to college and did more theater and got my bachelor's degree in theater and Japanese language. And then when I was in college, I was like, hey, I think I want to do this professionally forever. So I went and got a master's degree in costume design from CalArts. And then after getting out of CalArts, I went and have been working in costumes ever since.
What was the first costume you ever made?
Oh man. What was the first costume I ever made? I was really into costumes in high school, and I think it was probably in high school. I made I think I started out trying to make clothing to wear to a Renaissance festival because their costumes were always beautiful and very expensive. And so I was like, how can I do this and not have to pay all this money because I'm a high school student and I don't have $300, $400 to spend on a Renaissance gown. So I think I probably tried to make something to wear to a Renaissance festival and just got progressively more complicated as my skills increased. So yeah, I think I started out making costumes for Renaissance festivals.
Let's see here. What's probably the most detailed thing that you've put together as a background costumer?
Ooh, okay. The most detailed thing I've put together as a background costumer. Do you mean in terms of something that I have personally put together, or the most complicated scene we've put together, or
whichever? I'm just fishing for stories. So
okay. I mean, that's tricky. This is really my first job as a background costumer. I hadn't been a background costumer prior to Picard, and I don't know if I can talk about any of the really cool stuff we've been doing.
Doesn't be spoilers. Oh no.
Yeah. So I don't know if I can talk about any, but we have some really cool stuff coming up that would be a great story for this, but have to keep it to myself.
We'll have to touch base again once it's all out there in the world.
Yeah,
right?
For sure.
Oh man. We talk a little bit about how you've transitioned from your MFA into where you are now.
Yeah, so I got my MFA in costume design, and I am interested in being a designer. I'm still pursuing that goal. But initially, when I got out of graduate school, I just needed a job because I needed money. And also, I don't like to be idle very much. Like, I like to be constantly active. So I kind of fell back on skills that I had because I started sewing very early. So I got a job as a costume fabricator for Universal Studios Hollywood, the theme park. So yeah. And, it was actually a really great place to work. Like, it was more or less seasonal, but it was like long season. So like 8 or 9 months, because we do their Halloween event, which is thousands of costumes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'd do their Halloween event and then we'd roll into Christmas. So basically be off from like January through April or January through May, which is a pretty good, it's almost like seasonal theater. So, and it gave me it gave me time in between to work on other things and like design independent features and music videos and do all sorts of things. So I did that for like 2.5, 3 years. So I started out as a stitcher for them and then moved up to a cutter draper as well. And then, but I'd been working on trying to get into the costume unions, right? So I was working at Universal Studios and got a call from a friend who was like, hey, I know somebody who is embarking on a tier 0 union project that is going to flip. Do you want me to put you in touch? And I was like, oh yeah, absolutely. And I was like, I don't care what the job is. Like, it doesn't matter. I'll do it. Like, if it's going to give me my union days, I'll do it. And luckily she contacted me and she's like, yeah, we want to start prep next week. And can you do it? And I was like, well, I'll have to quit my full-time job. And I was like, you know what? Let's do it. Why not? Let's go for it. I've been looking for an out from Universal anyways. And I was like, the worst thing that can happen is that it doesn't give me my days and I'm right back where I started. Like, so I decided to take on that project and it was like a web series, like a time traveling web series through like a bunch of different eras, but it was like a comedy. We had a little break from Picard, right? In the first January break, not the second January break.
Yes.
Yeah. The first January break. So one of the things that I've been doing over my time during like the 6 months where we weren't working in quarantine was boning up on my digital illustration skills.
Ooh.
So I've been like, had learned Photoshop and Illustrator I like kind of learned it in college and then like did more of it in graduate school, and then was like, well, I've got time to do stuff, and it's a work from home sort of job I could do. So I had been boning up on that, and had been working with a designer who was trying to get a job. The job fell through, but she hit me up during that Picard break because she had just been tapped to design the new Transformers movie.
Ooh.
So she hit me up and I was like, yeah, sure. So I ended up doing a bunch of costume illustrations for the upcoming Transformers movie, which
Nice.
got me into 892 as an illustrator.
Do you want to talk a little bit about being a dual card member? You're the first
Yeah.
person I've been able to rope into this that is a dual card member.
Yeah, I'm a recent dual card member, obviously. This has all happened within the last, I got into 892 last January, February. So it's been about a year in 892. And then 705 was 2 years before that, more or less. But yeah, I think it's really interesting. I went in as an illustrator because understanding that I could reclassify later to classify to assistant designer or designer. And I'd been looking for an in, to be honest. But also illustrators pay the least amount in dues. So it's a good place to be while I am otherwise on Picard because I can keep my dues low. But it's been really interesting. I've been trying to get involved in both of the unions and just kind of seeing what the conversation is on both sides of the unions. And especially with the most recent union negotiations, I had been going to both the 892 meetings and the 705 meetings. And because I was curious to see, are they in agreement? How do they feel about these negotiations? Is the information the same? Because I was trying to see if there were biases in either of the leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And because you don't know, because you don't hear what the other unions are talking about or anything. And generally, all the union leadership was in agreement with each other, and they were saying very much the same thing, but they had different ways of explaining things. So I felt like I got a pretty holistic idea of what the issues were, because some of things were explained better at 705 and some things were explained better at 892. And they had different goals slightly because the structures are slightly different. But yeah, so I've been trying to get involved in both of those as much as possible.
Do you want to talk about some of your favorite projects that you've worked on?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely Star Trek is very high on that list. It's the longest consistent film job I've ever done, besides my Universal job, which I had done for a couple of years. But it's definitely the longest consistent film job I've ever done. I mean, I feel very lucky in that I have been on a lot of projects that were mostly good instead of mostly bad. And I feel very warm about my time in this industry so far, which is, kind of, I feel like a lot of people over time feel less warm.
Sometimes.
But, yeah. But yeah, so I feel like the job that got me into the union was, I think, it was very hard because we had an extremely small team, an extremely limited budget, and I was the only person on set consistently, or pretty much at all. And but I feel like the team was really fun, and the script was really exciting and fun, and I really love comedies, I discovered, because it's just a good time. They're generally a good time. You can be a little bit more flamboyant and the energy level is fun. And if you get some good actors, they're constantly cracking jokes, and so I feel like that was a really good time. Especially considering it was sort of a time travel show. So we did Mozart, we did 1920s, we did sort of the 80s. We got to kind of pull a bunch of fun and unusual things, and it was almost kind of a drunk history style of show.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it will ever air because I think the network it was supposed to go on never made it, but who knows?
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like that is a real highlight for me, even though it was a very hard job. And I also designed a feature about a year out of graduate school. That was also an extremely hard job because a lot of those early jobs, you're a department of one. And yeah, so, and designing a feature as a department of one is a big job, but it really, it's like, some of those are kind of fun because you get a lot of independence, and you really get to know the director and the producers and the actors and the crew, because you are the first and last stop. So I feel like the relationships that I was able to build on these jobs where I really get to know everybody are some of my highlights.
So what are some of your favorite tools to work with?
Physical tools, or?
It doesn't have to be. I mean, some people have said like their cell phone, sync on set. Alejandra had an app that I'd never heard of.
Oh, exciting.
Yeah. From my perspective, like a tool could be anything that you find useful, right? Like the thing that you use the most, or something that you like to have in your kit, no matter what, or like a preferred program to illustrate in, or
I feel like they're all different because every situation requires different tools. I feel like when I'm doing fittings, you can't work without like a measuring tape, and I really like those like really skinny black sort of like felt tip markers, because I have really messy handwriting and I tend to smear all over the place, and those don't smear, which is useful. When I'm sewing, and I used to do a lot more sewing than I do now, but those Choco rollers, those like really skinny line, those sort of like Clover brand, like roller markers were like, oh, so good. Those are so good. And like a good set of silk pins. Love silk pins, and a walking foot. I have a walking foot attachment for my machine at home. And then I guess when I'm on set, I chopstick, 100%. Can't do anything without chopstick. And I have a like hip pouch that has like a few little, I found that as opposed to like a shoulder bag or like one of those clear bags, hip pouches work really well for me on set because you wear them for many, many hours, and it helps distribute the weight of all your equipment to your hips as opposed to your shoulders. So I'm a big hip pouch person, which I also bought my pouch at a Renaissance festival. So bringing it all back.
What are some of your favorite materials to work with?
I feel like as opposed to, I love prints, and I love really big, bold graphic prints. I love to put those in everything. So whenever I'm doing work for myself, I love a good print. I'm like wearing these like big printed pants right now. I don't know if you can see them.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, I love bold prints. So anything that has like a nice bold print on it. Since I studied Japanese, I'm really interested in really basic geometric shapes and how to make garments out of like really basic geometric shapes. When I lived in Japan, I went to kimono school for like 6 months.
I'm so jealous. I'm
cool. Friends with Laura Wong as well, who is also a kimono person. So all those kimono are just big squares because the fabric can only get as wide as the width of the loom. And so they just create long panels, the width of the loom, and then you cut them in different lengths to make the sleeves and the body and everything. And that's been really learning about that. And especially in undergrad, learning about sort of like folk garments and how everything was sort of based off the width of your loom has been really influential for me in terms of trying to figure out like, how do we make simple shapes do everything we need? Sometimes they don't, and you really need really complex shapes, but just trying simple shapes first and then manipulating from there. So I guess those are some of my favorite materials. Love a good printed cotton. You can't go wrong.
What was the hardest thing for you to learn how to do?
Oh man. Hardest thing for me to learn how to do is still illustration. Like illustration is very difficult for me, and it feels like the sort of thing where I'm still ramming my head against a wall. Because I don't think as well in 2D as I do in 3D, which is part of the reason I love costumes, because it's a three-dimensional art. It's crafted around a body. And I feel like I'm a much stronger sculptor than I am an illustrator. So I like to do a lot of draping as opposed to flat patterning, but I'll go back and forth. But illustration is still the thing that is consistently the hardest thing that I am still working on day after day, week after week. I never get to a point where it feels comfortable or easy.
Let's see, what is an industry secret you wish you had known when you first started out?
I feel like people tried to tell me this, but I didn't listen, which is that costumes, the pay rate for costumes is significantly lower than most other departments. And it's a reality based in historical sexism and feeling that garments are women's work and women's work doesn't deserve to be paid as highly. And that it's a craft as opposed to an art. So I feel like that is one of the things that, like, people tried to tell me this, and my teacher tried to tell me this, and I was like, no, I want to do it anyways. I'm going to do it anyways. And I still did it anyways, but just sort of like trying to figure out, well, how do we make up the gap, basically. And then I think the other thing that I realized recently, which is sort of a weird realization, but I was day playing before Picard on the remake of She's All That. They called it He's All That, with like a TikTok star. It's on Netflix. It's not a good movie, but I was just like looking at all these kids in this like teen movie, and I was like, oh, it's all designed. Teenagers used to look at movies and feel like, why aren't I as cool as these teenagers? And it's because it's all designed, and it's the creation of like a 50-year-old woman and her team. And the reason these teenagers can get away with wearing short shorts and you can't because your school dress code doesn't allow it is because there is no school dress code, because it's not real school. Like, which I don't know why it never occurred to me before that, but something about working on this teen high school movie, I was like, oh, they're super cool because they have a team of people dressing them and everything's been made to fit them. And also it's not realistic.
And a lot of them aren't teenagers anymore, which is,
and a lot of them aren't teenagers because you run into like labor issues when you hire teenagers.
Yep. Yeah. It's amazing how many 30-year-olds play teenagers.
I know, right? Or, a good 25-year-old.
What are some of your favorite details to add into it?
Okay. Especially on Star Trek, I've been trying to put as many OBs in as possible. And like trying to use all my knowledge in how to tie an OB as possible. So we have a lot of background, especially in season 2, who are wearing like variations on OB ties in all different iterations, because I like them and I got to tie the bows, so they're OBs now. So I feel like that's one of the things that I like to throw in there, is like complicated OB knots and just sort of like other sort of like Japanese inspired textile innovations, whether it's sort of like shashiko stitching or indigo or things of that nature. I also love to try and incorporate elements of non-Western dress. My mom's side of the family is from Bangladesh, so I'm always trying to sort of push a little more non-Western dress and textiles and techniques into Western dress. And it works really well in a sci-fi context.
How have you navigated through your career? What motivated you between transitions?
What motivates me between transitions? I feel like a big motivator is my desire to be a designer. And that's sort of the biggest sort of like element of reason to keep moving forward. I'm trying to gain as much knowledge as I can, because I see the role of a designer as sort of it's a collaborative department leader, but it doesn't do you any good if you don't know what everybody else in your department does, because you don't know who to go to ask for certain things. You don't know how to talk to people about what their jobs are. So I think it's really important to really understand like what the elements are, from every aspect of the costuming process, so that you can have a good collaborative team. So I think that's which is part of the reason why I'm still working on my illustrations. And it's been really exciting to get to work on a project of this scale that Star Trek is. And also just to like look at how the designs that have been coming down the pipe, when they land on the bodies, and I'm in the fitting room and like looking at some of these things to be like, oh, this is an issue. So I'm going to stash that in the back of my brain. So the next time I have to do something like this, I don't do this. Or this was a really cool idea and it worked really well. So I'm going to stash that in the back of my brain for the next time this comes up. So it's just been really exciting getting to kind of like work with various designers on this show, to see how they solve problems and to stick that in my craw for when I get the chance to encounter the same or similar problems.
What technique or project really gets you excited?
Ooh, technique or project. I am a big nerd, so I am really excited by anything that is non-contemporary. So love sci-fi, would love to do a sort of like period or historical project. Like I would dying for one of those opportunities. I know, really would love to do that. And similarly, anything that involves non-Western dress gets me really jazzed. Like I'd love to do like a movie that is like, I don't know, 1870 Singapore, or like just a place and time combination that we don't see, or like 1920s, like French Quarter, Shanghai, or like India in 1940, like something that is, we don't, or anything like, so that is the sort of project that I would love and would get me really jazzed.
That's so cool. Let's see here. What is the most challenging part of your?
Definitely interpersonal relations, and navigating all of those is consistently the most challenging part of the job. I think, especially when you are working on set or with background, because especially as in background, you meet so many people every day, and you are trying to meet the needs of sometimes like hundreds of people, and all of their bodily needs are coming down to you to try and solve. And people come at you with different ways of like some people are super polite about it, some people are not super polite about it, some people need things solved immediately, some people need things solved eventually, like, and so like all of these interpersonal relations, and then just in terms of talking to the set team, the set PAs, the ADs, just everybody trying to get everything working at the same time. It is a miracle TVs or movies get made, because they are such an intense amount of labor. It's incredible.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the nitty-gritty process of a show flipping, what it was like and what was involved?
So the show that I got involved in, I knew it was going to flip before I took the job, which is part of the reason I said yes, but that is not always the case. And the designer I was working under on that show she initially got in because her show had to go on strike to flip. So I had heard about the stories of having to like call in a union complaint to basically have them come out and investigate your show in order to get it to flip. But at least in my case, it was a very low budget project, but it had a high budget producers. So they knew they should be paying people more, essentially. So I don't entirely know what the process was before I got there, but I worked for the first couple of weeks on this show as non-union, and then they got the paperwork in, so it flipped. And when something flips, all the days you've worked previously turn to union days. It's like it retros. So if you are on a show and it flips on the last day of shooting, all those days you've just shot become union days, and they have to up you to the union rate, and you get they have to fill in your pay rate from the beginning. So at least on my show, we worked a couple of weeks at a lower rate. They finally got their union paperwork in. I then got retro pay for those days, and all my days became union. And then there's a whole 2-month process of sending in your paperwork and your pay stubs and all that stuff. It gave me nightmares, but I got it in and it's done.
What role have mentors played in your career?
Ooh, big role. I have, again, luckily been very fortunate to work with a lot of people who I really enjoy working with and have been very kind to me. And I've been able to maintain some of those relationships over the years, which is very positive. So I really, when you find a good mentor, it's really valuable to keep up with them. And I don't even mean keep up with them oh, can you help me with this? Can you help me with that? Just even give them a progress email every 6 months or year or 2 years, just to be like, hey, I was thinking about you the other day and I just wanted to say thank you. I was thinking about that project we did because it reminded me of this project we're doing, and this is what I'm up to. Because they appreciate that a lot. So I just say, good mentors, when you find them, and you will find them, are totally worth keeping up with. And, and they're just people who you click with, or you have similar interests, and they're at different points in their career from your career, or I don't know, just something about what they're doing speaks to what you're doing, and it feels worth it to continue our relationship.
What advice would you give to students who want to follow in your footsteps?
I would say learn about every step of the process. Don't ever assume that you're not going to have to do something. One of the 2 really good pieces of advice that I got were, there's no work that is below you. At any stage of your career, there is no work that is below you. And say yes to everything. But the greatest caveat I got was for a while. That's not to say you have to say yes to everything forever, but just say yes to everything for a while. And then you can determine what is worth, and then you give a better sense of what is worth saying yes to and what is worth saying no to. But at the beginning, say yes to everything for a while. So I feel like those are 2 really good pieces of advice I've gotten.
What kind of education do you recommend?
I went the very traditional route and got multiple degrees, which really worked for me because I love school. And I like going to school, and I like learning things in an institutional setting. So at least for me, that was really beneficial. And I had, luckily, the familial support to be able to take that route. But I would, in general, just say, pursue the form of education that you are most enthusiastic about. Because if you have to do non-enthusiastic education, you're not going to get as much out of it. So if you're not about the institutional setting for learning, and you really want hands-on education, do the hands-on approach. And if you're really into the institutional situation, do the institutional situation. That it worked for me, but I absolutely understand it doesn't work for everybody.
What kind of skills would you like to see in new workers that you work with?
Oh man, I think that sewing and patterning is it is an absolute must for everybody who works in costumes. I do not understand how designers and assistants do not have that skill set. I don't know how they function. Like, it is a must. And will just make you a much stronger overall costumer, supervisor, coordinator, whatever. And I would say that you should get that skill up to I don't know, a middling stage, not just I can sew on a button, but I can understand these patterns. I can diagnose general problems. Like, it's just, I think it's non-negotiable personally.
Let's see here. How do you choose which projects or employers to work for?
Ooh, I have started to employ a 3-part system, which is connections. I think it's like connections, money, and enthusiasm, essentially. So if a job doesn't give me 2 out of the 3, it's not worth investigating. And if a job has 3 out of the 3, absolutely take it.
Let's see here. What is the most important thing for creating a successful collaborative environment?
I would say I really admire Mitch, our supervisor on Picard, for the way that he runs his department. And it's been very he's been really incredible to work for and to work under. And I think one of the things that he does really well, and I really appreciate, is that he's a pruner, not a shearer, I guess. So if he is like growing a bonsai tree, he's gonna just kind of like come around and sort of like prune the edges, as opposed to trying to like control every element of the tree's growth. So he's not hands off, but he checks in, but mostly lets you do what it is you need to do and lets you come to him for questions. And I think that system works really well. I'm trying to think. He also has this great line, which I've occasionally heard him use, that I've passed along, which is, he'll ask if anything is okay, as opposed to is everything okay? Which I love that line of his. So I like his is anything okay approach, as opposed to is everything okay? It's is anything okay? Because he knows not everything can be okay.
Yeah. Oh, so what are some red flags you look for in a working environment?
Oh yeah. I feel like, especially in this industry, people really need your help all the time, because it is inherently collaborative, which I really enjoy. But a big red flag is if they don't give you the information you need upfront to make a good decision, or you get there and the situations are drastically different from what you were promised or what you had come to understand about the job. And I feel like that sort of sniff test you kind of developed over time. But yeah, so and just sort of like very vague or passive aggressive communication is also a red flag.
What do you feel are the hallmarks of a well-run show or workroom?
I mean, there's the creature comfort aspects, which is love a good snack, love a good system of snacks. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's well run. But I think some of the hallmarks of a well-run show or workroom is just a workroom where you are not nervous to ask questions. If you feel like you can go to anybody, or you can go to your supervisor and ask a question, even if it's 50 times, and they will still give you the same consistent, calm answer. That's great. Hopefully you don't have to ask it 50 times, but the fact that you feel like you can go over and over is when you find that, it's incredible.
What do you like to negotiate when you're considering an offer?
Ooh, what do I like to negotiate? I guess it depends on what the job is. When I'm designing, especially if they're small projects, I always negotiate for an assistant. And if they don't have the budget for an assistant, it has to be a really, 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 really good opportunity. And then I feel like when I'm working as a costumer, cell phone is like a must. I have to really need to negotiate for a cell phone because my iPhone right now has, let me see, how many photos? It's 34,359 photos.
Yep. And super too, because
and it's super important because you're gonna have to take photos all day and send them, and then you have to upload them, and you need to hold on to them until the end of a project because you need to reference them constantly. You're constantly taking photos on set, and you're taking photos of objects. You need to share them. So like, cell phone is an absolute must if you're a costumer, especially if you're doing any form of fittings or shopping or whatever. Because not all these photos are set photos, but 90% of them are, or job-related photos, and I've got 34,000 photos.
Yeah. Well, not to mention it's California state law, but the shows that actually follow that are
yes, minuscule.
What advice do you have for dealing with personalities that you don't necessarily mesh with?
Ooh, okay. I took this advice from my dad, who is he's a physician. And so he's had to develop bedside manner over the years. He's very good at it. So I've taken this advice from my dad because I'm not always good at holding my tongue, especially when I get very frustrated or emotional. And so he said to develop a series of stock phrases that are neutral, that you can say to people in situations, because I can't always trust myself to say the right thing. So I've developed a series of stock phrases like, let's look at this together, or I'll check and get back to you, or like, let me check with my supervisor, or thank you, I'll look into it, which is a good way of dismissing somebody without being dismissive. Just like when you can't think of anything else good to say, if you have just like a series of like very neutral, polite stock phrases, it helps me a lot.
Is there any other advice or anything else you would like the general public or producers or anyone who might see this video to know?
I feel like we covered a lot of the bases. You had very good questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know. I feel like reiterating everybody who works in this industry and in costumes really loves costumes. Like, they really love what they do, and I've met some of the most incredible, like, well-versed, highly knowledgeable people doing this job. And it's a really fun environment, especially on Star Trek. It's a really fun environment to get to work in, because I get to talk to people who are highly enthusiastic about like really specific expertise. And that's super pleasurable because I am also just a costume nerd at heart. And yeah, and I would just hope that everybody can, I don't know, sort of like get enthusiastic about the work and the way that we do and see it for the like the highly specialized and unique art that it is, because it's, and just like see it as wearable sculpture, more or less. And I guess for the director producer side, one of the things that I've been talking to directors about, especially new directors, in terms of trying to talk about like the importance of costume, is to think about how much of their frame is filled by a costume. So if you have somebody in a costume or an actor's body on a frame, a costume is a quarter of your frame sometimes. Sometimes it's a half of your frame. So if it takes up that much of your frame, that should take up that much of your thought and energy, maybe. So yeah, that's how I feel about it.
Is there anything that I can plug for you on here? Like, do you have an Instagram?
I do have an Instagram. It's more personal, but I'm hoping to upload some more illustration, especially once I can show some of that Transformer stuff that I did back in the day. But yeah, I've got an Instagram. It's Beryl_IUM Beryllium.
Oh, cool.
And but let me see.
That is nerdy. I love it.
So
right.
yeah. So
I will
yeah.
link that. And anything else you'd like linked to or to plug or no? Okay.
I've got a website. It's BerylBrachman.com. Yeah, I've got a website at BerylBrachman.com. And if you've got a cool project that needs a costume designer, hit me up.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for offering this interview.
I am so excited to get this out there. And you know, I'd love to get to know you better. It seems like we have a lot of
we should talk.
A feather kind of things to relate with. So that's very exciting. So, and thank you again. I know this was kind of out of the blue, and you know, but thank you so much for your time on a weekend. I know you don't have a lot of time. So thank you very much for coming and doing this.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me to come talk to you. This has been a lot of fun.
Good. All right, you have a great rest of your weekend.
Thanks, you too.